Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Beth Lewis. I'm with Save Our Schools Arizona, and we are so honored to be here hosting this town hall about this very critical topic. We're co-hosting with Children's Action Alliance, Arizona PTA, and Arizona Center for Economic Progress. Arizona schools are facing a $1.2 billion cliff if the legislature does not act by March 1st to lift the outdated school spending cap. That is 19 days away, or 10 working days for the legislature. So we're very, very honored that you're here to hear our message tonight, and we hope that you'll take action with us at the end of this call to reach out to lawmakers. We have an incredible panel tonight. We have David Lujan, the CEO of Children's Action Alliance and Arizona Center for Economic Progress. We have Ann Gabrielini, president of the Arizona PTA, Dr. Dan Streeter, superintendent of the Marana Unified School District, Stephen Chapman, school board member for Tolleson High School District, Raquel Mamani, parent and teacher in Madison School District, Susan Collins, music educator in the Kingman School District, and Nikki Indikovich, parent in the Prescott Unified School District. So we're going to hear some boots on the ground perspective of how these cuts will impact our kids. First, we're going to start with some information from Mr. Lujan. David, as you know, is an incredible champion for Arizona kids and a policy guru to boot. So I'm going to pass it over to David to explain the nitty-gritty about what the aggregate expenditure limit is and isn't, and what the legislature needs to do.
Thank you, Beth. Good evening, everyone. So before I start, I want to make one really important point, and that is no state in the country spends less on public education than Arizona. Arizona ranks 50th in per pupil funding in the country. So you may be wondering then, so why is it that we could possibly be over our spending limit in the state? And that's because back in 1980, a group that was led primarily by some ranchers and farmers at the time who were concerned about rising property taxes went to the ballot and asked voters of Arizona to pass a school spending limit because they believed that would keep property taxes low. Well, at the time and since then, there have been many other measures that have been passed that are actually much more effective and have been working to keep our property taxes low. But nevertheless, the voters of Arizona in 1980 passed a self-imposed school spending limit, which limits the amount of money that we spend to teach our students at 1980 levels. And so that spending limit is adjusted each year for inflation and student population growth. But really, it's a very antiquated, outdated formula, because it's based on what it costs to educate students back in 1980. And you can just imagine how teaching students has changed in 3 decades. I mean, we didn't have the internet, we didn't have technology back then. We didn't have school shootings, so schools didn't have to put as many resources around school safety and keeping kids safe. And so the spending limit is really outdated in that it's based in such 1980 levels. But nevertheless, we have this spending limit in place, and it really was not a factor for much of the past many years. The couple of times that we've come close to the spending limit, the last time really was in 2007. And that year, the legislature overrode the expenditure limit, just like we are asking them to do this year. We thought at that time that the spending limit was going to become an issue year after year because the cost of educating students was at the level of what our spending limit was. But as you may recall, the next year in 2008, the Great Recession came, and from 2008 to 2014, no state in the country cut more funding from public education than Arizona. And all of those cuts from 2008 to 2014 put us well below the spending limit. And we've spent much of the last decade trying to climb ourselves out of that hole. And so we are now just barely starting to get back to where we were at 2007 spending levels. But let me make one thing perfectly clear. It's not like in 2007, we were spending a lot of money even then on public education. In 2007, Arizona was still in the bottom 10 in funding for public education. So the problem is that we have this spending limit that is simply outdated and based on 1980 levels. If we can see the next slide. So the issue at hand now is that for this current year, this current school year, Arizona public schools are $1.2 billion over our self-imposed spending limit. And so the Constitution basically says in that instance, there's only one other option for when we hit the spending limit, and that is the legislature can give permission to override the spending limit for this school year. But to do so, it requires a 2/3 vote of both the House and the Senate in order to override. And so that means 40 members of the Arizona House of Representatives and 20 members of the state Senate have to vote to override the school spending limit. And the law says they have to do it by March 1st. If the legislature does not do that by March 1st, then the only other alternative that is in the law is that school districts will have to reduce their budgets by a collective $1.2 billion statewide in order to get under the limit. They'll have to do that by April. They have to revise their budgets. And so this is money that school districts have already received, they budgeted for. They were told that they could use these monies at the beginning of the year, and now they're going to be told they cannot use the monies that they have already received and had budgeted for, back in September or August of last year. And you can imagine how difficult a task that's going to be for school districts, because they're going to have to cut about 17% of their budgets with only 3 months left in their school year. And so you're going to hear shortly, I think, somewhat how hard that is going to be for school officials. So that's the issue before us. And if I could see the next slide. So there's really two issues at hand. One is the immediate issue. We need the legislature to act this year to override the school spending limit so that school districts can spend all of the money that they have and have budgeted for this year. But there's also a more long-term issue that we also are hoping the legislature can address this year, because that is, we need to modernize or eliminate the school spending limit that's in our state constitution, because we cannot continue to have a spending limit that is based on what it costs to educate students in 1980. Because it's in our state constitution, the only ones who can change it are us, the voters of Arizona. So either some group can go out and collect signatures, we know how difficult that can be, to put a measure on the ballot for a future election to either eliminate the school spending limit or modernize it to modern levels, or the legislature could actually refer a measure to the ballot to do the same thing, to either eliminate the school spending limit or modernize it. And so that's the long-term solution that we really need, because we're hitting the spending limit this year. We hope the legislature will override the limit, but we're going to start to have this issue year after year. We're going to be in the same situation at this time next year and the year after and the year after until we fix the school spending limit, because and it will continue to basically keep us in the basement in funding nationwide until we fix the spending limit. Because as I mentioned at the beginning, we are last in the country in per pupil funding, but yet we're already at our state spending limit. And so any measure in the future to try and put more money into our public education system, any measure to go to the ballot to try and increase funding for public education system, schools are not going to be able to use that funding unless we fix permanently the school spending limit. And so we are going to remain in the basement of funding in the country until we fix this long term. So that's the situation at hand. The more immediate issue, as we've been talking about and why we're here tonight, is we need the legislature to override the school spending limit by March 1st. Otherwise, school districts are going to face these drastic cuts that you're about to hear about. And so I'll turn it back to Beth for the rest.
Thank you so much, David. I know we're going to have a lot more questions for you, and Thank you for all of the questions in the chat. I think David answered several of them, and I'll try and collate them towards the end. I want to make sure to hear from our panelists too. So I'm going to send it over to Dr. Dan Streeter first, Superintendent of the Marana Unified School District. So the Marana School District stands to lose $15 million, over $15 million, starting April 1st. So Dr. Streeter, can you give us a little bit of insight on the impact that this will have on student learning if the legislature doesn't act?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, let me talk a little bit about the impact that it'll have in a couple of areas, and I might be leaving my lane a little bit here, so I do apologize, but there's three things that this type of reduction is going to impact. It's going to obviously impact our kids, but this also impacts our community, and this is also a local economic issue. Marana is a community of 50,000 people. School district employs 2,000 employees. We are the largest employer in our community. So in the snap of your fingers, when you take $15 million out of your local economy, there's going to be an impact to that. And when you consider that 82% of our budget is people, right? So how do you address 17% of our budget being taken away from us in the snap of the fingers? It's going to end up being jobs. So not only have you taken $15 million out of the local economy, but now we're having a conversation about what is the impact on jobs in our community and how does that impact our community as a whole, right? We're talking about a lot of hourly wage jobs. You're talking about your support staff. Those are conversations that now bleed into how are we making rent, how are we making car payments. So this issue transcends just education. This is actually a local economic issue that needs to be factored in. But let me talk about kids, because here's the issue is that this all ends up on the backs of children once again, right? Common theme in the state of Arizona. So what do we do? How do we make this cut? Is it transportation? Do we stop transporting kids to and from school? That's not an option for us. Our district encompasses 500 square miles. Transportation is a necessity for our kids to access their education. But the conversations that we do have to have are what people are going to leave our system. And the conversations we're having to have is at a time when we should be doubling down on the support for kids, we're having to identify what supports we're taking away from kids. Is it reading specialists? Is it counselors? Is it social workers? Is it paraprofessionals that allow us to go small group interventions for our students? This is the impact. This is where it really hits student learning. We're coming off of an unprecedented worldwide pandemic that has left a lot of our students with unfinished learning. And we're having to identify ways to intervene, especially think about our youngest learners. Think about your first grade students who, for a lot of them, this was their first year in a classroom, lost kindergarten, lost preschool services. Second grade students, similar story. And we're seeing that reflected in literacy rates as a result of the pandemic. So while we should be doubling down on the supports that we provide for these students, we're having conversations about what parapros do we need to start talking about. If we have to dismiss those, do we need to reduce the number of reading specialists, reduce the number of counselors on our campuses, reduce the number of social workers, right? Do we need to increase class sizes at a time that we should be really hyper-focused on lowering class sizes so that we can reintroduce students into their educational settings? So this is a critical issue. I know I bled out of my lane a little bit, but I'm deeply concerned about, once again, we're taking what should be a very simple legislative fix and we're playing a political game on the backs of children. And the impacts of this are going to be significant, and they're going to be long-term, and it is going to impact our state's vitality going forward.
As a teacher, that it really breaks my heart, but as a parent, it infuriates me. Hopefully both. Thank you so much, Dr. Streeter. I know that these decisions are heartbreaking, and the fact that you don't know whether you're going to have to make them or not, and we're 19 days away, is that much more infuriating. I saw some messages, some some people in the chat saying that the chamber should get involved because of the economic catastrophe that we're facing. And I think you've given a very compelling reason why that's true. So I hope people will reach out to business leaders and make that case. Next, we're going to hear from Stephen Chapman. Stephen is a school board member for Tolleson High School District. Stephen, can you help explain how this funding, the funding that has already been tied up in contracts, et cetera, differs from the federal COVID dollars, and why keeping this funding is so critical for West Valley students? And how I think in Tolleson, we're looking at $17 million. So how will this impact your kids?
Yeah, I think the important thing to notice, I think, is skimming through some of the questions that were in there, is that this is money that's already been allocated, money that we've already budgeted. So this isn't. It's one of the questions in there that I saw. This isn't that the legislature gave us more money, so to speak. This is just essentially us having to ask them to be allowed to spend all of the money they gave us, which sounds strange, but that's just the way that it's set up right now. For Tolleson, we are looking at a little over $17 million. In conversations that I've been having with my administration, this year we'll probably be okay as far as like staffing. Like, I don't think we'll have to have any of those conversations, but the long-term problem, I think, as I've been seeing in there as well, is this isn't just a one-year thing. With the continuation of 301 through the legislature without addressing the AEL, this is going to be an ongoing issue until AEL is addressed because of inflation, additional funding, things like that. School districts across the state are going to continue to be up against this AEL until it's addressed either through the legislature or by the voters of a referendum, initiative process, whichever we end up doing as a state. But this is going to be an ongoing issue. So if school districts are talking this year about possibly closing, the doors to one school, imagine what next year is going to look like if this isn't addressed permanently. And then just wanted to touch to some of Dr. Streeter's points that, unfortunately, this has become a political piece, political prop, rather than the looming financial crisis that it is for Arizona school districts. We're hearing games around. They're waiting for rulings on Proposition 208. The judge has said that the judge doesn't have to rule until after March 10th. We're nearing up against a March 1st deadline and having to make cuts by April 1st. I was sitting in the Senate Education Committee the other day with Beth and several other people, and just hearing some of the conversations there, it didn't sound like even everyone on the committee fully understood AEL and the risks that it is. I think even one of the senators said, why are the districts not living within their means? And again, these are the means we were given. We're just not allowed to expend them all because of the way the law is designed. So this is going to be devastating for communities. This is going to be devastating for students, families. To Dr. Streeter's point, we're talking about the $1.2 billion impact to the economy. We've already seen in Arizona over years of businesses not wanting to move here, not open up here, despite some of the economic growth we've seen. There have been companies that said we don't want to come here because your education funding. And we're going to send a message here in a couple of weeks if we don't do anything that we're willing to cut 16% of education funding, at the drop of a hat. What's that going to tell the industry that we seem to be proud of coming into Arizona, especially the tech industry, where they need folks who are going to school, going to college ready, that we're willing to just cut 16%, for political games. So if you have not already, please contact your legislators. Certainly contact those sitting on the House and Senate Education Committee, the chairs of those committees, the Speaker and the President of the Senate. We have to find a way to get these people moving, and hopefully it's not an 11th hour kind of fix.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Stephen. I know areas like Tolleson are going to be deeply impacted, but we also have a lot of smaller urban districts that will be impacted as well. We've got Raquel Mamani here. Raquel is a parent in the Madison School District, and she's also been a substitute for the last 2 years all over Madison School District. And I think, it gives a very interesting perspective because she's been in many classrooms across many schools. And so she really has that boots on the ground perspective of how this loss of funding will impact Madison schools. So
thank you, Beth. Thank you so much. Yes, actually, I've been subbing for the last 4 years. And so I've been subbing pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. And let me tell you, it was tough pre-pandemic subbing and just seeing what was happening. And so now post-pandemic, you know, I went through the hybrid model. I saw the teachers, you know, do twice the job. I saw administrators and staff doing twice the job. And, you know, now we're doing in person. And you know, basically I've seen every stage of what our teachers, what our students are going through, and what was happening before. And now that these cuts are looming over us, it's having a devastating effect on our teachers, because they are at the end of their ropes. We are at the end of our ropes. And now we have something else, this monster looming on us. And so, you know, for Madison, you know, people say, oh, Madison is one of the good districts. You all are only going to lose 6 million. But, you know, that is a devastating cut for any district, especially when we are suffering from the very same things that so many of the other districts are suffering from, which is big, huge class sizes. We do not have enough teachers. We see our superintendent in classrooms. We're seeing directors of instruction in classrooms, directors of budget directors in classrooms. And so on top of everything else that's happening with our education system, it's just been a real slap in the face. And I was talking to teachers just today that said to me, I don't know if I can hold on anymore. And, you know, it's not only angering, I have both. I have the broken heart and the angered heart all at the same time right now. And so, you know, that's why talking about this is so important, so that we can see it from so many different angles. I live in the Madison School District, but I was born and raised in a rural town, Nogales, Arizona. And the devastation to that community, you know, keeps me up at night.
Yep, and I saw when I was looking earlier, I saw Nogales is also going to lose $6 million. And, you know, if you crunch the numbers and you think about this being like the last, you know, whatever 16% of the year, I mean, we're talking about 500, that's enough to pay 500 teachers.
Absolutely. And especially taking into consideration, like, I think Mr. Lujan, you know, mentioned that we never came back from 2007 and the recession. And so, you know, especially for small towns, you know, $6 million in an economy in a town that's already been devastated and really never came back from the recession is really a death blow to their schools.
Thank you so much, Raquel. Speaking of small towns, we've got Susan Collins here. She's an amazing music educator up in Kingman, Arizona. And so, Susan, I'd love your perspective on how, you know, the failure to waive this spending limit would impact rural schools, and then also the arts. I know you're a passionate champion for arts education.
Well, one thing that I always think about with rural schools is that in so many rural communities, mine included, and some of our outer lying areas, even from Kingman, is that your school is the hub of your community. It's your main social service. It's where your kids get fed. It's where parents get educated. It's where children get educated. We're the second largest employer in our area. The largest is the hospital. You know, the economic impact of people being without jobs, of children possibly being without a place to go during the day, is humongous. And you know, like was said earlier, we're a rural district. We cover, Marana covers 500 square miles, which is a very large district. We cover 3,500 square miles. We're huge and we're remote. Our buses run 6,000 miles a day. $8 million out of our budget at the very end of the school year, when it's sitting in the bank that we simply cannot spend, is devastating. It's devastating emotionally, it's devastating financially, and it's devastating academically. And I have no idea how many teachers we're going to lose because they're just going to say, I'm tired of wondering if I'm going to have a job again next year. And that's just, the overall picture. When it comes to arts education, I know that what I do, I teach elementary general music, and the simplified version of what I do is I play games with kids all day. Well, kids need to play games because kids need to keep a steady beat in order to be able to read fluently. They need to be able to cross their midline in order to develop reading comprehension. They need to learn patterning in their bodies and through their ears so that they can recognize patterns in math and with numbers and computation. What I do is vital to the academic growth and development of the children I teach. But we have seen consistently across districts, when something's got to be cut, it's going to be the arts, and I have not anywhere, and please tell me if there's somewhere this has happened, I haven't seen anywhere that athletics has been cut, but the arts almost always get cut. And that's where your kids that don't fit into the academic nerd model or the athlete model, your kids that are just kind of their own free spirit, that's where they fit in. That's where they find a place to belong and a reason to come to school. And we're running on a shoestring as it is. And if you fray that shoestring, we're going to lose the arts and we're going to lose kids.
So well spoken. I was one of those arts kids, and I value what you do. We all do. You're amazing, Susan.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we have the president of the Arizona Parent Teacher Association, Ann, here, and Ann is obviously a parent, but as PTA president, she's talking to parents all across the state. So Ann, we'd love to hear your perspective on, what you feel, of course, and then what do other parents, what are they thinking about all of this?
Hi, everybody. So from a personal perspective, I currently have a student who's a senior in high school. And he's been on the background listening to conversations and listening to me make phone calls. His concern right now is what's going to happen for graduation. We're fighting, and he's explaining to me, giving me his perspective. We're fighting COVID every day. You're going into school. Are you a masker? Are you not a masker? Are you a vaxxer? Are you not a vaxxer? And he's been having to deal with this for the past 2 years. He comes into school. He's a senior now. He's excited. They set up a date for graduation. They got the venue here in the West Valley. Everybody seems to graduate from the stadium. So he's all excited. Question now is he's asking, and his friends are actually sending me text messages. Does this mean that we're not graduating? Are they taking away our money because has this bill been paid? So from these students who've had to deal with so much for so long are now going and went into the school year with such a positive, hopeful sense of the world, are now going to be knocked down again. So from my son's perspective, I feel this every day. Statewide perspective, we're getting Arizona PTA had sent out a voter voice distribution asking our local leaders to contact legislators. And we're getting questions like, what happens to this money? If we don't spend it, what's going to happen to it? Somebody actually had said, well, compare this to building a house. Say you have to build a house for $250,000. You budgeted it, it's there, the money's in the bank. And all of a sudden they tell you 16% you can't spend. That's about $40,000, I think, if I'm doing my math correctly. You're not going to be able to spend that money. So what are you going to give up? The roof, the nails, a front door, and now this affects our kids. So we don't know, and based on our superintendents, they don't know what they're going to be cutting either, which now a lot of our parents were not even aware that this was happening. They were just like, okay, COVID was settled to the extent that our kids are now in school full time. What do you mean you're going to take it away from us again? And how much notice are we going to get if you have to close these doors down? And then the teachers are answering and asking us questions like, do you think my job is going to get cut? Do you think we're just going to get rid of the programs? I personally work as a paraprofessional in a school, and we're all speaking and trying to figure out what's going to happen with us. The school can only do so much and get out so much information until they have a concrete answer of what's happening. I have parents now, we're Arizona PTA, so we do focus on public schools, but we have charter schools asking us, what's this going to mean for us? I like my charter school having a certain amount of students in my classroom. Does this mean now that we're going to be inundated with public school kids? This is not what I signed up for when I went into this particular charter school. So regardless of where you are in the education platform, as far as Arizona PTA is concerned, this is going to affect you, and not in a positive light and not in a positive way. So we're asking our parents to reach out to our legislators. We're asking our parents to sign into these Facebook webinars that we're having, to inform them and let them know what's going on and what it is that we can do to help, because it's living day by day. And it's causing a lot of stress and a lot of grief. And, you know, I'm going to echo some of the other comments about this being an employer. So I'm in the West Valley. My school district is going to lose $29.9 million. What's going to get cut? And now we're going into the summer program. So I have parents now saying, should I count on having my child go to the summer program in their elementary school? Or do I have to start looking, you know, to pay exorbitant fees going into a summer program in another professional type of atmosphere? It's heart-wrenching. COVID was enough to stress every single person on the face of the earth. And now we have this being thrown at us in Arizona. So we're urging everybody to reach out and get in touch with the legislators. One of the biggest questions I keep getting asked is, what's going to happen to the money? So it was budgeted. We're not spending money that we don't have. We're not spending money that was never said, this is your money. What are they going to do with that now? So this is more money that we're not going to have access to. And as we mentioned before, going back to 2007, dollar amounts is not helping with this additional budget cut, because it is a budget cut to our school districts. So it's a lot of stress. So I'm just going to encourage, right? So I'm encouraging everybody, get out and speak to your legislators, regardless of where your child goes to school, because it's going to affect your children, as well as a lot of people who are working in our school districts.
Absolutely. I would love to just, I'm going to have Nikki speak, but I would like to pitch that question right over to David, because I think it seems to be a burning question for a lot of folks. So David, what does happen to that money if, in the worst case scenario, the legislature decides not to act? Do you know?
I think, and keep in mind, this has never happened before, so we will be first time we've ever experienced this if it does happen. And I think in many instances, that money goes back to where it came from. So whether it's your county county departments of education or to the state, and that money cannot be used again by school districts. So it will go back to where it came from.
One of the other kind of recurring questions, just to keep it succinct, is, you know, sort of what is the other side thinking or hearing? Like, what is the argument against doing this? We're hearing a lot of questions around, you know, well, why did they spend this money, and why didn't districts plan better, and, you know, all of that. Can you help us, give us a little insight?
Yeah, let me just clarify a couple things. I saw a couple questions in the chat too about why did they give them this money if we knew they were over the spending limit. Let me first explain how the timeline works. So school boards for this school year all around the state, they were told how much money they were going to have for this school year back in May and June of last year. So that's when they passed their budgets for this current school year, and they received the money in July when their fiscal year started. The determination that we were going to be over the limit was not made until November. So they had already budgeted, school districts had already made plans for that money for the entire school year. And now they're being told they're over the limit, and this, you know, unless the legislature acts by March 1st, they're going to have to cut. So that's a little bit about the timeline. To address a couple other things you said, and I've seen in the chat about our school districts wasting this money. Absolutely not. I mean, if you talk to any educator, and we have many examples here tonight, school districts have been struggling in Arizona for 3 decades. We have been in the bottom 10 in the country in funding. Arizona, and this is according to the US Census Bureau, spends among the lowest in administrative costs in the country. And so you hear a lot about bloated administrative spending in Arizona. That's simply not true. I think there's been a link to audits. Every school district in Arizona gets audited regularly. I think school districts are probably audited more regularly than most other public entities in the state. So the idea that there's all this fraud or waste is simply nonsense. Arizona schools are struggling and have been struggling to get by for many years now. And then, our school districts exceeding their budgets. I will reiterate what I started at the very beginning. We are dead last in the country in funding for public education. The reason we are hitting the spending limit is not because we have a spending problem, it's because our self-imposed limit in the Constitution is so low. It's based on 1980 levels. And that's why we have to address that spending limit for the long-term solutions.
David, probably one last question that we have time for. I know that there's a lot of kind of misinformation or just confusion around the interplay with Prop 208. So can you explain just that, Prop 208 dollars haven't been collected and how it's really not related?
Yeah, thank you, Beth, for that. That's another excuse, frankly, that you're hearing from some legislators as a reason not to act on the spending limit. As you know, voters in 2020 passed Prop 208, which would infuse about $1 billion in new revenue every year into our school districts. However, not one penny has gone into the school districts for this school year. The Prop 208 funding, if it gets approved by the courts, will not start to go to school districts until next school year. So it has nothing to do with determining the spending limit for this school year. And some legislators are saying that some legislators who frankly want to kill Prop 208 are saying, well, if we do something this school year to override the spending limit, we don't want that to be used against us to somehow support Prop 208 from going forward in the future. That also is an excuse because the Supreme Court in their ruling last August said very clearly that the fate of Prop 208 has nothing to do with what the legislature does this year on the school spending limit. The Supreme Court said that, it's in the decision. So Prop 208 has absolutely nothing to do with the school spending limit issue that we are facing this year.
I think that's really helpful. I hope that we're doing a good job of answering the questions in the chat. There are so many. Thank you so much, everybody. Our last person on the panel, Nikki Indikovich, is a parent and amazing advocate for students. She's a parent in Prescott. Putting the spotlight on you, Nikki. So can you just give us a rundown of how this will impact rural schools in your area, how you see this as a parent, and then maybe walk us through this incredible email tool you've been putting in the chat.
Absolutely. So first of all, thank you to all these panelists. I like being able to hear the different perspectives from our school leadership teams, our administration, our teachers, our parents. That's vital because I think Anne hit on a really, really valuable point here. This impacts every single person. Even if you don't have children in a district school, you are going to feel the impact of a wave of families looking for alternatives in an emergency. Daycare centers are going to be, again, overwhelmed. And we remember what that looked like. And we've been through that. And so we know how dysfunctional that can be. So I appreciate the panelists weighing in from different perspectives. I will say last night, I went to my school board meeting. If you're a parent or a teacher right now, I would urge you to take a look at your school board and see if they're having conversations around the cap. My school district came to the conclusion that, they were looking at closures, widespread closures, bankruptcy, becoming insolvent. It's about $10 million the wrong way for my district, which is obviously you can't recover from that in a rural school district. And so you can get a lot of information from your local school board on, what their plans are. A lot of them are looking at that now. And that will help answer some of the questions. And for parents, I think, and community members who are just coming to this issue and really feeling overwhelmed by the information, I think your best route is always going to be to try to sort out what's going on locally with your community, because every district is going to respond so differently to this. Some districts may be able to withstand a portion of these cuts because of their specific financials, and maybe they don't close, or maybe they don't have to lay off teachers. But some other districts, like mine, will be in closures. It's clear because we know where our local budget lies. That has a lot to do with the funds that aren't counted in the cap, like bonds and override dollars. They don't go towards that cap limit. And so if your district is in a better position, perhaps, and they can insulate your community, which is great, you can find that out locally. You know, you're not going to get those answers from a statewide perspective because of just how diverse those budgets are. So check into your school boards. In terms of our lawmakers, which is, you know, my only pitch ever, our lawmakers need to hear from parents, community members, and teachers. I was at the Capitol yesterday. I will likely be down there a couple more times this session. And the voices that are weighing in on this at the Capitol are not parents, teachers, community members. That's not who's given access to that Capitol. And so you have to make up for that. You have to make yourself very, very available, is a good word, to your lawmaker, meaning they know you're going to call them. They know you're going to email them. They know where your kids go to school and how frustrated you are by behavior like this. And if you can keep that consistency up and kind of form a relationship there, they may just give you an update that nobody else has, so you don't email them again. And I am a big supporter of making sure that your lawmakers know that you're concerned about your kid, you're concerned about your community, and that you need them to answer for this. Because one thing we've heard, you know, in a lot of these meetings, which I've done far too many in the last couple of weeks, is that there's confusion around who controls this. And that's deliberate. There is an effort to say, you know, soups can fix this. They should have planned, or boards can just, you know, plan accordingly and understand we're going to take some of their money back. That's not true. There's one place this issue gets addressed. It's at the Capitol. Nobody can lift this cap. If school boards could lift this cap, it would have been done. There's no way they would have inflicted this kind of damage on themselves had they had the opportunity to lift it. So how do you do that? A really good place to start is if you're new to advocacy and you don't have your lawmaker on speed dial, you can start with our tool. We have an email tool that is just a couple of clicks. It's very easy to use. It will let you know, who your lawmaker is and walk you through that process quickly. We also have a tool that you can use to call your lawmaker. So we'll get you in contact with your lawmaker. If you're going to call, remember, you will probably leave a message or speak to their assistant, which is fine. What happens down at the Capitol is their assistant will note, you know, how many times people called and what they were asking about and where they landed on an issue or a bill or policy. So those are really, really great options, both of which have been dropped in the chat link here. And then of course, in our Facebook Lives, I'm going to go make sure that every single chat stream has those if we've gone live on any other platform. So those are tools that you can use. I'm also going to drop my email, which is always, you're always welcome to reach out and speak to the leaders at Save Our Schools Arizona. We would love to direct you. We have staff in the field that is working on this right now. We have some canvases rolling out. We've got phone banks rolling out in regional areas. So there is always a place for you to lend your voice. You do not have to know everything to speak up. None of us do. We don't really know what's going to happen here. So please reach out if you want to get involved. I'm going to drop another link that you can just sign up to volunteer, which is basically like make calls, email, things like that. There you go.
Alrighty, David, did you have any parting words for us?
Contact your legislators and tell them to get this done by March 1st. Really important.
Yep.
Beth, do you mind if I just make one comment?
Absolutely. I'm trying to change the spotlight. Sorry.
Oh, you're
Sorry.
good. I've seen a few reoccurring things in there about auditing and financial transparency for school districts. So I just kind of wanted to comment on that. And Dr. Streeter, feel free to correct me where I might be wrong on this, but school districts are audited often. Our budgets are not only public, they're developed in public, they're posted on the state's website. They're available at the school district. They're available at the school district's website. We actually are also required, it's called what's called truth and taxation. We have to post that we're going to be doing our hearing. You're then invited to the meeting, well, any public meeting, obviously, but there's a budget hearing. During that time, the board actually recesses from the regular meeting. The budget is shared with anybody that's in there, including the board and the community. And then the community is actually able to ask questions of the board, the district staff. It's happened in my district a few times. I know there's some districts that have ample community participation and some districts that have no community participation. And then the board votes to pass that budget right there in public. It's available. We also have to come back 2 or 3 times to do budget updates, just to make sure that all of our expenditures are in the right place. Those are also open to the public. Our vouchers are approved at each board meeting for all the expenditures. I'll let you walk away with this. The most regulated industry in Arizona is public education. So, comments about shenanigans and things like that, it's not happening. And even if it were trying to happen, it's caught fairly quickly because of all the mechanisms that are in place, unlike in other industries and other sections of non-school district education. So just, again, our finances are very transparent and very public.
That's right. And I know a few have hit on it, but I just want to reiterate that this is, it's not a crisis that's been made. It's a crisis that's been capitalized on. This is a self-made crisis by the legislature. So, we cannot allow them to wheel and deal, play chicken with our children's futures, and districts should not have to face these pressures right now. Teachers should not be sitting in workrooms talking about whether they will lose their jobs in a month. There is no reason that the legislature can't act tomorrow to get this done. And we know that the only thing they respond to is public pressure. So please, we are grateful that you're here. We're grateful that you're using the email tool. We need you to get the message out further. You can share that email tool on your social media, wherever you're comfortable. Maybe email some of your colleagues, text them. The more people they're hearing from, the more likely it is that we can get this done and quickly and stop the games. So thank you for being here. Thank you to all of our amazing panelists and to our co-sponsors, Arizona PTA, Children's Action Alliance, and Arizona Center for Economic Progress. We appreciate everybody who's here. Thank you. We'll keep you updated.
Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank you, everyone.